Do you ever feel like you want to be better prepared for emergencies, but aren't sure where to start or how to find the time with all of your other responsibilities? We hear you, and that's where preparedness in your pocket comes in. This podcast is your portable solution for accessible emergency preparedness education. Our episodes are pocket sized yet packed with important preparedness information, making them easy to digest and learn from wherever you are. Preparedness in Your Pocket is brought to you by the Maryland Emergency Preparedness Network, a dedicated communications network providing no cost emergency preparedness education, training, and resources to home and community based professionals, patients, and their caregivers. My name is Kendal Lee, and I am the EPN's Program Administrator and your host. On behalf of the EPN, we invite you to make this podcast an essential part of your preparedness toolkit. Just like keeping your keys and wallets close, think of this podcast as your preparedness partner, on the go, always ready to support you with valuable emergency preparedness tips. Join us as we empower you to be better prepared for emergencies, one podcast at a time.
Welcome back to Preparedness in Your Pocket. I'm your host, Kendal Lee, and I'm so glad to have you here with us today. In our earlier episodes, we focused on how to stay informed, stay connected, and stay ready. Today, we're building on that foundation by talking about how to safeguard the documents and valuables that help you recover and move forward after an emergency. Because preparedness isn't just about surviving the emergency, it's also about protecting your recovery. By the end of this episode, you'll understand what categories of documents to safeguard, why access to them matters during recovery, how to store these items using layered protection, and lastly, how to protect meaningful valuables that can't be replaced. To guide us through this conversation, I'm joined by Jorge Castillo, Chief Spokesperson and Branch Manager for Communications and Outreach at the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. He has worked tirelessly to expand MDEM's communications reach, building the largest digital following of any state department in Maryland. He's a nationally and internationally recognized speaker and has shared his expertise at institutions like Towson University, Loyola University in Maryland, and New York University. Jorge, welcome back. We're so excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Kendall. It's always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this episode too as we continue our journey in preparedness. So hopefully I'm ready to have a good time. I'm ready to have a meaningful conversation that hopefully will impact some folks that are listening to us. So I'm ready to go. Very happy to be here.
Me too. I'm so excited. So I'd like to start today off with a scenario. So imagine returning home after an emergency. The immediate danger has passed. You are safe, your family is safe, but recovery is just beginning. You need to call your insurance company and you can't find your policy number. You need to refill a prescription, but you don't have your medication list. You need to verify your identity, but key documents were damaged. That moment is when preparedness either supports you or slows down your recovery. While we can't always control what happens during an emergency, we can control how prepared we are beforehand. So, today, we will be exploring what it means to safeguard critical documents. Jorge, could you share with our listeners first what we mean by the word safeguarding, and then why safeguarding critical documents is such a critical part of preparedness?
Absolutely. And before I get into this, let me just start because this scenario really highlights something that a lot of people don't think about until it's too late. And surviving the emergency is only the first step, right? Recovery starts immediately afterwards. So thinking about that can be overwhelming, right? Like scenario that you depicted is typical and it happens, it can happen, it does happen, and it will happen. and it'll make your life a lot more difficult, especially in the recovery space, if you don't have these things in place. Now, having said that, don't freak out. Preparedness seems overwhelming. If somebody asks you to climb Mount Everest tomorrow or do
Mhm.
a 26K marathon in a week, it seems like it's so much. How are you going to do it? The way to think about preparedness, which we have discussed in previous podcasts, is it's just a step every day or every month or every year that moves you into that direction of preparedness. Don't expect to do everything today, tomorrow, or next week, or even next month, because it's not going to be realistic. This is just a way for you to think about things in a slightly different manner so that you can take small little actions that'll make your life easier should these things happen, like this scenario that you described. First thing to keep in mind is we're going to be talking about a lot of things that you could do, but just remember, one little baby step at a time. The thing is just motion in the preparedness direction. That's what we want to achieve with you. In terms of responding to your specific question about what is safeguarding, that basically means protecting these
Mhm.
documents in a way that's going to ensure that when you need them, they are, number one, in good shape. Number two, that they can be used for whatever purpose they're being asked for. And number three, that you actually have access to them, which is going to
Mhm.
be sometimes very challenging if the electricity is not on, if the roads are closed, if you cannot access the internet, for example. All of those things are potential roadblocks. And today we're going to be talking about how to get over those roadblocks by preparing before. In this scenario, one of the biggest frustration that we know survivors deal with is not damage to their homes, but losing access to that important paperwork and the information that they rely on every day. We can look at some things, for example, insurance claims, housing assistance, banking, even disaster recovery programs that are
Mhm.
going to require that you have some sort of ID to prove who you are, right? And if you don't have that readily available, if you can't prove that, it's going to make the recovery process a lot longer. And that's just not going to be good for you and your family. And very important, unfortunately, when these disasters happen, they create opportunities for bad folks. So people are going to be trying to scam you, trying to steal your identity. We know that following an emergency or a disaster, fraud complaints often increase because criminal knows that people are stressed, they're distracted,
Mhm.
and they're vulnerable. So this is their time to attack, right? When your defenses are down, when you're stressed, when you're crying, when you just can't imagine this scenario that you only saw in movies is actually happening to you and to your neighbors and to your family, that's when they attack. And that's why you want to do all of the stuff before so you don't have to be thinking about that. Once those bad actors get control of your identity, then it's even going to be worse. Keep that in mind as well. We're going to be talking about also how to identify these potential scams and
Mhm.
how the proper storage and access to your documents diminishes the probability that you are going to be a victim of these scams, right? That's what safeguarding documents is about. That's why it's important. And that's why we're here to talk about it today.
Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate you defining it for our audience. And again, just to recap, safeguarding is another word for protection. So thank you so much for sharing that so thoroughly and reminding us that preparedness protects both what we rely on and what we value most, which we'll talk more about. So now that we know why safeguarding our important documents and valuables is an important part of preparedness, let's talk about what items we should be safeguarding. So, Jorge, if someone is starting from scratch, what types of documents and valuables should they prioritize protecting?
That's a great question again, because when people hear important documents, they usually think about a passport, birth certificate, and stop there, right? But preparedness, like you mentioned, is really about protecting things that are not just important in terms of business and identity stuff, but also things that are deeply personal. Think
Yes.
of those album of pictures or a special memento that you have from a special trip from your grandmother who passed away 20 years ago. Those things are also things that could and should be protected, right? So in terms of categories, we like to think of 5 categories. Number one, the IDs, so all the identification and household documents. For example, birth certificate, social security, driver's license, etc. Second category is medical and insurance information. So these are also very important because these are the things that you're going to rely on should you need emergency or any sort of health care, medical care. But the insurance information is also going to allow you to begin that process of getting your claim started, right? Then we have related to that, but it's really a third category, is the financial and legal records. So wills, all the information that you need to know where your money is. How many bank accounts do you have? How many savings accounts do you have? Do you have certificates of deposits? Do you have Roth IRAs? Do you have IRAs? Do you have a 401k? How do you access that information is the first question. And is that access protected in a way? Fourth is emergency contacts and plans, right? Emergency contacts, unless you can memorize some folks' phone numbers and their addresses and all of that, which I commend you for. You should definitely try to have at least a couple of those memorized, but you should always have a place where you have a list of these emergency contacts. They're not just family, right? They're your doctor, pediatrician, your obstetrician, all of those folks that are important in your life. Maybe you don't see them on a daily basis, but when you do see them, they're very important. And the fifth and final category is personal valuables, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, whether they're pictures or special things that hold a dear place in your heart. Those are examples of that fifth and last category. So let's go down the list and unpack this a little bit because it's pretty broad, right? 5 categories, each of them with a lot of things inside. The first category, IDs and household items. Again, these are the things that primarily help you prove who you are. Driver's licenses, birth certificates, social security cards, passports, insurance cards, lease agreements, mortgage paperwork, and don't forget the recent utility bill, because that has your information and also proves your residence, right? So utility bills are very important to have. If you ever have to apply for assistance, or if you ever have to replace something important, or even check into temporary housing for an emergency for a few days or a couple of weeks or sometimes months, right? These documents can make the difference. The second category that we identified was the medical and insurance information. Think about the information that you would want should you suddenly need to stay somewhere else for a few days, right? For example, you are now in Pennsylvania, right? We are moving in an emergency from Maryland to Pennsylvania. You had to leave some things behind, including your prescriptions, right? So you're in Pennsylvania in your sister's house. You got to get that prescription, and you don't remember what the name of a prescription because it was a little complicated. What do? You don't even remember the exact address of your pharmacy, for example. The internet is down, so you can't do a quick search. That's when you need that information from your doctor, your pharmacy, so you can call and take action in that way, right? This is going to be very, very important in the event that either you or people who rely on you have medical needs and need prescriptions, or to contact their doctor in any sort of scenario. Moving on to the third category, it's the financial and legal records. This is everything from banking information to insurance policies, your vehicle titles as well, wills, powers of attorney, tax records as well. Very important if you're going to be applying for any kind of assistance, and they're going to determine your eligibility based on your tax returns. Well, you need to be able to access that information as well. We also have the emergency contacts that we described, right? Imagine if your phone dies or your phone gets damaged sometimes. Let's say in the rush of getting out, your phone falls into water, right? And it's kaput, right? So again, do you remember everybody's phone number? So having that printed list of contacts is very, very important. And finally, the personal things that matter emotionally, right? Like family photos, videos. Something that I always think about is those handwritten recipes that have been handed down, military medals, baby books, favorite stuffed animals. Every family has a different set of things that are very important to them. And these are also things that you should think about in terms of safeguarding. And this is our final category. The good news again, you don't have to do all of these things at once, right? As we like to say, preparedness works best when you take small steps over time. So out of all these categories, let's just say pick one. Maybe you pick your IDs, right? And start working on that. Maybe in December, you do category number 2. Slowly but surely, you get through all of those.
I appreciate this. Thank you so much for framing out which documents and valuables to safeguard in a way that paints the picture of the categories, but then giving valuable, no pun intended, examples of each. Something that I was reflecting on as you were talking was 2 things. The first one is that all of these documents are important to have access to for yourself, and I would add those that you care for. And I bring that up because here is a case scenario based on my own personal story, which is I was nannying for a family in college, and the parents of these children went out of the country. And before they went out of the country, we worked together to gather these important documents that I would need should anything transpire in their home, documents for their home, access to neighbors, family members. So we went through similarly to these categories where what would I need to have if they were not here, right? Those household documents, those emergency contacts. And the emergency contacts came particularly in handy because I not only had to take one of their children to a pediatrician because of an injury, an illness that happened at school, but I also had to contact their veterinarian and take their pet to the veterinarian during this week while they were away. But because I had these documents and information in advance, I was able to troubleshoot, problem solve with ease and move through the course of events. And all things turned out well and safely because we safeguarded these things. Yes, it's for yourself, and it's for those that you love and that you're immediately connected to. If this is a parent, if this is a child.
If you're a caregiver taking care of somebody, that definitely includes that list of documents for that particular person as well, because you are the one that's going to be responsible. And it also helps in terms of the anxiety. I like to think of a 1-2 punch when something happens, right? The first punch is the shock of the situation. Oh my God, in your scenario, this kid, I don't know what happened, but let's say he broke his arm. Oh my God, Bobby broke his arm, right? That's the first shock.
Right.
Then you go into action mode. Okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to take him to the pediatrician, right?
Right.
This is where your preparedness saved you from the second punch, because somebody who didn't have that information would have been like, oh my God, who's the pediatrician? Who do I call? For a broken arm, you would have gone to an emergency room, but let's say there's going to be like a follow-up, right? And so that secondary anxiety shock, that's what we're trying to alleviate, because instead of going, oh my God, who's the pediatrician? Who do I call? You're like, oh, okay, let me go to the box. Let me pull out the document that we worked on last week, and there it is. And all of a sudden, right, you just have so much more clarity on dealing with the situation because you don't have a second crisis.
Yes.
This is what happens when you're not prepared, is the 1-2 punch. The first thing happens that you have no control over, and the second one is your reaction now that you're starting to consciously realize that you don't have what you need to get through. And that is what starts weighing you down and makes you more stressed and makes you make more bad decisions at the end of the day.
Yes, I agree. It serves as a reminder that preparedness can bring us peace of mind in an already overwhelming moment. And that is something we can control in advance of the unexpected happening. The other piece that came up for me as I was listening to you talk that we will spend more time diving into later in the episode is you emphasize access to all of these documents. So both digitally, but also I would say in print or some sort of physical form. Shall one or the other not be available? And that's something to think about and that we will come back to later in the episode, especially in this world that is very dependent upon technology. Our daily lives are built around it or like heavily rooted in the necessity of it. And with that, we must also prepare ourselves if for whatever reason we did not have access
Absolutely.
to that resource. So thank you. Okay, so I appreciate you walking us through these key items that we should be thinking about safeguarding that helps us prioritize what's important. So for someone who is just getting started, what would you recommend is the very first step they should take to begin protecting these documents and valuables? Thinking about the first step being an inventory, for example, because you cannot protect what you haven't identified.
Absolutely. And that is honestly the very first step. And it's a lot simpler than what people may imagine. So that's the good news, right? The very first step is quite easy. And like you said, you can't safeguard, you can't protect what you have not identified that you even have or you even know where it is, right? Now, having said that, I know that when you say the word inventory, sounds intimidating, right?
Shift it to list.
Yeah, to list, exactly. Yeah. Because we're not asking people to create a giant spreadsheet. But think about this because this is as easy as it can be. And I've done this and I've done it several times, especially for insurance companies. But it's as simple as walking through your home with your phone and asking yourself, what would be really hard to replace if it disappeared tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Once you have that idea, literally write down that list and then begin taking inventory with not only the list, which is going to help you actually begin the process of safeguarding those things, but with your phone, you're also either taking pictures of those documents and files, which you already have on paper, but now you go from paper to also having the digitals. But you're also documenting your house and your belongings and what's
Yeah.
actually inside your house. You go into your closet and you take a nice video of all your clothes because that's going to help you with the insurance companies to say,
Yeah.
yes, I had 10 suits and each of them was worth, I don't know, 300. So
Mm-hmm.
this is about how much those are worth. If you don't do that, you're going to be at a disadvantage because you will have no way to prove that you actually had contents inside your house that are worth an X amount, right? So that's also why that is important. But going back to creating that list, once you actually ask that question, what would be really hard to replace if it disappeared tomorrow? It triggers something in your mind that creates this wow moment, right? Maybe it's the folder with the insurance paperwork that nobody else in the house knows about, right? You start thinking, uh-oh, well, people should know about that because what if something happens to me? Then they can't access that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you start going into that line of thinking and questioning. Maybe it's grandma's handwritten recipes that we mentioned earlier. They're in a kitchen drawer. Maybe it's a spare hearing aid batteries or the medical
Mm-hmm.
paperwork or the charger for a mobility device that everybody assumes they'll remember during an evacuation. Put yourself in the situation of every morning if you have kids and you're getting them out the door, right? How much stress, how much chaos is that? Even if you get up early, something unexpected happens and you're behind schedule, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how you start getting stressed. And that's something that you do like every day. Now imagine in a
Right.
situation where you're just completely shocked by what happened. When you start thinking of what it would be almost impossible to replace if you didn't have a way to either safeguard it or document it or protect it, or the fact that you may know, but nobody else in the household knows, right?
Mm-hmm.
So back to the list that we were talking about. That's
Mm-hmm.
why it's important because it helps you identify three things basically. Number one, what's most important? Number two, what would be difficult or very expensive to replace, or perhaps even impossible to replace, right? And number three, what information your family caregivers would need if you weren't able to communicate it yourself, right? That's something that I always think about because I'm the keeper of all things finance, but everything is put together in both a physical and digital space, I would call it, and everybody who needs to know where that is and who has access to that is aware of that, you know. And then we have a backup for the will. So those people also have a copy of that in the event that something happens and I'm not able to be there. That's why this list is very important. And I definitely encourage everybody to start with that question, then make your list, and then start documenting, taking pictures, and creating a digital reservoir of these things too.
Yes, thank you so much. It serves as a reminder that knowing what you have is the very first step in protecting it. And as your preparedness partners, we want to empower you to be able to begin taking that small step, as you mentioned, right where you are. And we are always quick to provide resource to do so. So our partners over at FEMA have created a document titled Safeguard Critical Documents and Valuables. And in that document, you will find a checklist with open check boxes that will allow you to inventory or be able to verify what you have and what you need out of that list of those 5 categories we talked about earlier, which is those household identification items, those financial documents, the medical information, etc. And we will pop that guide in the show notes so that you can begin right from where you are without needing to take that step. And once you've completed your inventory, the next step is figuring out how and where to keep those items safe and within reach or accessible. That's something we've shared throughout this conversation thus far, but now we're ready to take a deep dive in what that can look like. So
now we're getting into the nitty-gritty.
Yes. Okay, Jorge. So let's talk about how to protect these items in a practical way, because we believe that preparedness works best when protection comes in a layered approach, like you mentioned before. So what are some strategies or ways people can use for both physical storage or that digital storage to keep these documents and items ready to access when they want to use them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you used the phrase layer protection because that's really the key. We don't want all of our important information or valuables stored in just one place or protected in just one way, right? Just like you don't put all your money in one place, right? You diversify. Same thing with this. It's risk management, basically. So it's the same concept. And you have to safeguard this, you have to protect that. Let's try to make this as simple as we can. Good starting point for physical storage is using something that is a waterproof, definitely, and fire resistant document box, right? So you definitely want to protect against fire and against water, which inside the house are going to be really the primary culprits that may damage these documents too. So this is actually one of the most practical things a family can do is get one of those waterproof and fire resistant document box or safe boxes, if you want to call them that. And this is where you start putting in your passports, your birth certificates, your insurance information, your backup medication lists, social security cards, and small valuables if you have them as well. So they have different sizes of these. They have small, medium, they have also really, really big ones as well. It all depends on your preference and your family and household size. So now here's something that people don't always think about, and it's the accessibility, right? And that's very important because if an emergency happens at 2 a.m., you don't want to be searching through the closets trying to remember where the important paperwork is hidden, right? While the goal is to secure and safeguard these documents, you also want to be able to get to them. So we're not suggesting that you dig a 20-foot well and store it there because you want to get this quickly to evacuate, right? That's the whole point. It's in a portable box, and if you have to go, you have your go bag, and then you got your document stuff, you get it, and you go. If you can't do that, that's also where peace of mind comes because you know that this safe box is going to protect the things inside, even if there's a fire, even if there's a flood, right? So that's giving you not only peace of mind, but also the ability to take it with you if you can. For some items, some folks may wish to consider a safe deposit box at a bank. This would be more for documents or valuables that are extremely difficult to replace. This is where you might have property deeds, for example, wills or family jewelry, or some of those things that are really irreplaceable. So consider that as an option too. A bank has these safes where you can actually store all of those things. Now, having said that, it's important not to put everything there because banks may not always be immediately accessible after emergencies or holidays even, right?
Right.
So this is where you have to think strategically. For example, is the grandmother's recipe, should that be something that you need to take with you, or can that be at a bank? If you start thinking about those things, you will be able to determine which things are better stored outside of your home versus the things that you need immediately and you potentially want to protect and be able to also take with you in the event that you have to evacuate. So you mentioned layer protection, and this means backup, right? And a backup to the backup sometimes. For example, you may keep the original documents in a fire-resistant box at home, but you also store some copies somewhere else. An example, my will, we have physical copy here at home in the safe. We have a digital copy in the Google Drive. We have a copy of the PDF in the email where that was sent to us. And then my sister and my cousin both have a copy of that digital will. That's the idea of layering, having a backup to the backup, basically. I also want to encourage people to think about grab and go preparedness. We briefly touched upon this, but if you had to leave home quickly, could you grab all your essentials under 5 minutes? This is for a small folder, a binder, or waterproof pouch with the most critical documents can really help during evacuations or sheltering situations. So again, you're thinking about safeguarding, layering, and portability. You want access to these documents. You want to be able to take them with you if you can. Sometimes, depending on the emergency, it may not happen, but that's why you have other ways to get to them. Lastly, preparedness, just like we say, it's one little step at a time. Preparedness doesn't have to look fancy. People sometimes use clearly labeled zipper bags inside a backpack. Others use portable accordion folders. And the system really matters less than you just having that access. And depending on your preferences, it doesn't have to be something fancy. If it works for you, then it's good. I think the biggest mistake people make is assuming that they'll remember where everything is during a stressful situation. Now, while you may be able to do that during a normal situation, we know from emergencies that our cognitive functions are impaired.
Yes.
We are pumped with adrenaline, we're stressed, and that's why layer protection helps create calm in those moments because you already know where your important things are and how to access them. And your brain can just focus on the matter at hand and not the things that there's nothing you can do about.
Thanks, Jorge. Now let's talk about digital backups. What are some strategies people can use for these digital tools to keep their important documents safe and within reach when they need them?
Yes, very important because just because something is digital doesn't mean that it's actually safe or protected or safeguarded. In fact, they may be at peril depending on where you put them. So this is a very important part of our discussion. I think the bottom line is digital backups are probably one of the smartest ways to stay prepared these days, especially since pretty much everybody has a smartphone on them nowadays. In the event that your physical documents get lost or damaged or left behind in an emergency, which happens a lot, having digital copies can save you a ton of headaches during recovery and just reduce the pain and suffering. In my mind, that's what preparedness does. Because bad things you can't control, it may happen, but the pain and suffering that happens during that process is significantly assuaged by being prepared. So in terms of digital copies, what's the best way to get started? We did mention at the very beginning, right, as an example, you take clear photos or scans of your important stuff and you stash them somewhere safe, right? Again, insurance cards, IDs, prescription, passports, basically all of the records that we already went through. This is where you actually take a picture or make them digitally. If you are not savvy, think of who would be able to do this with you and help you, right? Maybe you have a younger nephew or a grandson or even your son or daughter, right? Or you can honestly go to your local library and bring your documents. And if they have scanning capabilities there, you'll be able to scan that and then store that in the cloud secure password protective cloud or something like a USB or portable CD drive, right? Again, password protect these things. The first step is to put them somewhere digitally, but the second step is that they're not just accessible to everybody. So to get to that particular document, you need a password, right? So you set up a password protected folder, let's say in your computer, or you use an encrypted cloud storage, or there's even apps there that are designed specifically for this. They are built for keeping documents safe. So you basically store them there and you have a password, and that's the sole purpose of the app, which can come in handy as well. It does cost some money to maintain that, but that's an option that is available for you as well. Let's say you have a lot of things to back up. Family photos and videos, for example. Now we're moving away from the documents into more of the personal stuff. This is where I mentioned an external hard drive or USB drive. Sometimes you keep one at home and the other one you give to somebody like your sister, brother, or a trusted relative in an area so they can keep those documents there. One thing that people forget that I want to make sure we highlight here is make sure your loved ones or caregivers know how to get this information if something happens, right? Because again, we talked about maybe you're the only one who knows where the stuff is. That is not good. That is not going to help you. Even though this is password protected, make sure that people know where it is and can get to that password. Again, these are people you trust, right? That you're entrusting with your documents, your social security numbers, your bank information. So these are people that you trust. Just make sure that they also know how to access that too, in case you can't get to that. And again, it's not about being perfect. It's not about doing everything today or tomorrow or next week, but it's about having options. It's about taking it slowly. It's about the journey, right? Even a 10,000-mile journey begins with the first step, right? So if one backup fails, you'll still get another way to get what you need. And that's what really counts.
Yes, thank you so much. I was reminded as you were talking that when emergencies happen, and this is something that you mentioned earlier in the episode, we are at a greater risk for cyber incidents. And so having these digital backups, it's important to have them be password protected, etc., so that you can protect your identity and these other items. They're valuable. Now that we've covered how to protect important documents, the next step is thinking about your valuables, which we've touched on briefly throughout the episode. And these are the items that have personal, financial, or a sentimental value. Many of these same principles that we've talked about apply, but there are a few extra considerations to keep these items safe. So, Jorge, for things like heirlooms, keepsakes, photos, like you've just mentioned, can we talk about some steps people can take to protect them from damage or loss?
This is, again, very personal. It can be a photo album. It can be a baby book. It can be a handwritten recipe card, a wedding dress even, right? Those things that carry memories and are part of your family history. And these are the hardest things to replace once they're damaged, or sometimes they're irreplaceable. A lot of the principles that we've already talked about apply here, primarily that physical protection matters. So if possible, store these items in that waterproof, fire-resistant safe that we mentioned. If you don't have that, the best other option would be an elevated area in your home if it's prone to flooding. So that wedding dress probably shouldn't be in a box in your basement that floods once a year, right? It should probably be somewhere else away from that water. Again, though, if you really want the best protection, though, a fireproof and waterproof safe would be the best. We talked about that inventory, that list, and snapping your phone and taking pictures of all these things as well. If possible, along with those pictures to document what you have digitally, write down the descriptions, serial numbers, or appraisal sometimes. If you have something that was made in the 1600s and it's worth now $80,000, right? You make sure you are taking a picture of that and documenting that, because if that's insured, that's going to matter. As for photos and memories, we talked about digital backups being absolutely important. So not only pictures on your phone, but you're backing it up to the cloud as well. You're layering for security. And again, there's a balance between accessibility, and security, right? Some valuables are best stored securely and left in place, and others are worth including in a go kit or evacuation. So we kind of mentioned that too, right? What are you going to need to take out versus what can you store safely in another place too? Of all of these things, what is the most important thing is for your family to have that conversation ahead of time, because you're not going to be able to put everything on a safe. They don't make them that big. Otherwise, that's known as a house, but the houses are not flood proof or fire resistant. So you have to have that conversation with your family to come to that agreement of these are the things that we want to protect, right? Because what happens during an emergency is emotions are going to be running high. And again, having the planning, the preparedness happen beforehand is going to make a world of a difference. In this section of the podcast, we're not just talking about protecting your property, but we're talking about protecting the memories and traditions and the stories that define who you are. So this is a very important part of that. Some of these things, if you lose them, you're going to not feel whole. And so this is why it's very important to have that conversation with the family, decide these are the important things that we're going to safeguard. And now you have a way forward starting from that point.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate you sharing for our listeners. As I'm sitting here at my desk, I have a picture frame, and inside that picture frame is a note from my dad that is no longer with us. And it's a note in his handwriting. And so this is something that I have thought about if there were ever to be an emergency where I would have to quickly leave, et cetera, if there would be a fire, all the things that could damage something like that. What would I do to be able to preserve or protect something that is civil, as you mentioned?
Yeah.
So I wanted to give a personal antidote because I think we all have them. And that's what unites us in this, right? And that reminder that you shared at the beginning that preparedness really works best when it is personalized because it is personal. We've covered why protecting important documents and valuables is essential, which items to safeguard or protect, and practical ways to do it. So, Jorge, for our listeners who are ready to act, what is one small, reachable step that they could take today to start creating a preparedness plan that works best for their life?
And before I answer that, I want to reemphasize the key point that you mentioned, which is preparedness works best when it fits into your life, right? Otherwise, it's an exercise in futility. It has to fit in your life, not that it feels like a completely separate project. I just want to emphasize that again. In terms of what would be the first step? So I like to actually answer that with a question, which is what have you already done without even thinking of it as preparedness? Just to show you that it's not Mount Everest. It's more like a little steep hill, but you can definitely climb it, right? Most people have already taken some steps. Maybe you've already saved some important documents in a drawer, which is great, right? Instead of them being in 20,000 desperate places, right? At least that's a step, right? If you have your tax documents in a folder, you have your will in a folder, that's already a good step. Maybe you've already taken photos of your insurance card, right? And saved it in your Google Drive. Or you got a folder inside your computer with some medical paperwork. That's not nothing. You've already taken those steps, as you can see. And think about all the things that we've discussed that you're probably like, oh yeah, I did that. I have that ready. Oh yeah. We just have to keep on going. Once you realize what you've already got in place, then the next step is actually building on your foundation and what you already have, right? So let's say you have a pile of papers in one place. Maybe today or this weekend, you take 10 minutes to sort them into categories, the categories that we described earlier in the podcast. Let's say you've already taken pictures of documents. Now you move them into more of a secure password protected folder. The next step, if you haven't done anything yet, maybe the first step is simply gathering the basics, right? Just gather the most important things. Remember, we ask you to ask that question. What are those things that are important, that are not replaceable, that we really need? IDs, insurance, medical information, and start putting them in easy to find places, right? I always like to remind people that, again, this doesn't have to be perfect to be useful. One small step, like creating that folder that I mentioned and labeling it important documents. So forward momentum, small steps like we've discussed. Switching gears a little bit for caregivers, because now it's not only you, it's the people who you're caring about, right? This is also something that, just like you would have the conversation with your family on what is important, what do we want to preserve, and how, you have that discussion with the person with whom you visit every day and take care of them every day, likely, right? The question, if we ever had to leave quickly, what would we need to grab first, right? So that alone helps turn preparedness into something that's practical and familiar instead of overwhelming, because you're having a discussion. So if we had to leave, does that diploma from the university, is that
Right.
something meaningful? Oh, absolutely. I'm the first one in my family to graduate from college. All right,
Yes.
well, we'll put that on the list then. How are we
Mm-hmm.
going to protect it? All right, well, let's take a picture of it, and then we'll put that picture in a secure document. Okay, and what's the next step? Well, we're going to password protect that, right? And then we're going to let Aunt Susan know that this is in this particular location, and this is how she can also access it. And there you go, right? So again, the goal is not to do everything today, but to make one decision that helps you take that next step or make that next step easier.
Yes. I appreciate that. I think your reflection in the beginning that we are invited when we are preparing to first take a look at what we have already done or are already doing. We can start with what we have, with where we are, and do what we can. And I think be
Exactly.
empowered by the fact that preparedness is a human skill. It's one that we all have. It is a muscle that we all have that we exercise over time. And this is something that I'm reminded of when we come together for these conversations, because preparedness is something we both had to do to arrive to have this conversation at this call.
Yeah.
As human beings, we are always taking steps to prepare. We, in these conversations, are just turning our heads towards a different reason of why we are preparing.
Exactly.
And that is for emergencies. And we're hoping to have these conversations in a thoughtful manner so that the topics we touch on feel more reachable
Yep.
than stressful. I really appreciate you reminding us that even a small action can have a big impact. So, for our listeners who are seeking additional support, what resources then are available that people can use to make protecting their documents and valuables easier and more manageable? We're all about the resources here to
Yeah. Yeah,
equip
this is the
you
good part.
to.
We tell you the strategy, we tell you how to execute it, and then we tell you where to get the tools that you need. So one
Yeah.
of the ones that you mentioned was the FEMA's inventory/list that comes in
Mm-hmm.
very handy. And the good news is that there's more of those available nowadays. So
Yes.
you don't even have to spend time creating that. It's already done for you. So these are free and they're from trustworthy sources. So you can feel confident and safe in using them. One resource that I encourage the folks to look into is FEMA's Safeguard Critical Documents and Valuables fact
Mm-hmm.
sheet. It has also practical guidance on physical storage, digital backups, ways to organize all the
Yes.
information, which
Mm-hmm.
we've been touching upon. You can actually search for this if you go to Google or your favorite search engine and just simply put FEMA Safeguard Critical Documents and Valuables. You're going to get this resource that you can download and start using. So that's one resource. Another one is the Emergency Financial First Aid Kit, otherwise known as EFAK, EEFAK. And despite the name, it's not actually a physical kit, right? It's a preparedness workbook developed by FEMA and the folks at Operation Hope. And this again helps people organize financial, medical, insurance, and household information. So this is another one that I like to recommend because it makes things easier. Once you actually see these templates and you know exactly what you got to put on, it makes it a lot easier than to have to think of all of this. Instead of wondering, where do I even start? It's there. It just guides you through it. So those are two FEMA resources. Let's go to more local stuff here in Maryland. The MD Ready website, which is by MDEM, the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. That is a installable app. So it's not like your typical app that you go into the Google or App Store and you download. This is a little bit different. Depending on what device you're using, whether it's your phone or your laptop, it'll prompt you to install that. Good thing about this is that when the internet is not available, you can still go to your app and you'll have all those emergency contacts there. So you'll have your local health department, your local emergency management, your local hospitals, your local, your BGE or electrical power companies, phone numbers, etc. And all of those work without connection to the internet. In addition to that, you get planning information, hazard-specific resources, and what that does is basically gives the families a framework that they can use as they move in their preparedness journey. So it has a lot of things that are useful for this particular conversation, but also beyond that. And in closing this section, my biggest recommendation is this. Don't wait for the perfect time to get started, right? Because there's really no perfect time. The closest to perfect time is now. And preparedness doesn't happen in one afternoon. It's built gradually. Again, one small step at a time. So don't wait, get started.
Thank you so much, Jorge, for sharing about all of these resources that we have access to here in Maryland. And as you were sharing about these resources, I was reminded that, again, we are preparedness partners. So for our emergency preparedness folks, such as our friends over at FEMA or folks like yourself over at MDEM, you are the experts in preparedness. And for our listeners, you are the experts in yourself. So allow us to support you to better help prepare through these tools, through these resources. And you do the rest, right? That is why having access to these resources that have done the thinking and that legwork for you by an expert that you can trust is so helpful, so that when it comes time for you to do that thinking process, again, you are the expert on yourself and you can trust us to help get you started. So thank you so much for
absolutely
that reminder, because as I always say, sharing is caring. So speaking of sharing, as we begin to wrap up today's conversation, I would love to share one last takeaway for you. And that is that preparedness doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, intentional steps that support future you. Although you may never remember the day that you organized your documents or safely stored your valuables, if an emergency happens, you will be so grateful that you did. And so, with that, I hope you leave today's conversation feeling empowered to take that first step to safeguarding what is meaningful to you. So, thank you so much, Jorge, for sharing your expertise as always.
My pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for spending this time with us. Jorge, do you have any last things you would love to share as we prepare to close out?
Just wanted to thank you for this opportunity again. A big shout out to your listeners, and thank you for giving this your time and attention. And remember, small little step, one little thing at a time, and start today. Do that one little thing today. I encourage you to do that. I challenge you to do that.
Yes. Thank you so much. Okay, everyone, until next time, I am Kendal Lee, and this is Preparedness in Your Pocket, helping you stay ready, informed, and prepared wherever you are. So until then, stay prepared and take good care.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Preparedness in Your Pocket. This podcast is brought to you by the Maryland Emergency Preparedness Network, formed in partnership with the Maryland National Capital Home Care Association and the Office of Preparedness and Response within the Maryland State Health Department. This podcast is hosted and produced by me, Kendal Lee, the EPN's program administrator, and edited by Frankie Cirquetti of Storia Studio. Our hope is to meet your curiosity with content that boosts your confidence and strengthens your preparedness. At the EPN, we truly believe that sharing is caring, and so we invite you to subscribe, like our podcast, and share it with friends, family, colleagues, or anyone in the community so that we may all empower each other's preparedness. Please note that the information provided in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended to serve as legal or professional advice. While our discussions may include topics and products offered by the participating organizations, listeners should consult with relevant professionals or authorities for specific guidance and recommendations. The views expressed by our guests may reflect those of the hosting organization, though are not intended to replace official advice or guidelines. We can't wait to connect with you again. Until then, stay prepared and take good care.